The cold metal walls of the Confederation Council chamber echoed with the murmurs of heated debate. High-ranking officials from dozens of species sat in their elevated seats, their faces an unreadable mask of indifference as the human ambassador, Nicholas O'Reilly, made his case. "We know it was the Androsians," he said, his voice steady but laced with barely contained fury. "The evidence is irrefutable. They launched the attack on New Terra, and millions of our people are dead because of it. This is no accident. This is betrayal." At the far end of the room, a tall figure in blue and silver armor stepped forward. General Amelia Graves, commander of the human forces, had spent years building a reputation as a leader who could unite fractured human factions and face even the most impossible odds. Her eyes, sharp and unwavering, scanned the room, taking in every reaction. She was not one for politics, but the time for diplomacy had passed. "Ambassador O'Reilly is correct," Graves said, her voice cold and firm, silencing the room. "The Androsians are responsible for the destruction of New Terra. You've all seen the data. The weapon used is far beyond anything we've ever encountered. It was deliberate, it was targeted, and it was an act of war. But we cannot simply act on assumptions." One of the Exilorthian delegates interrupted, his voice high-pitched with concern. "This could be a misunderstanding, a rogue faction. You know how volatile the Androsians are. If we act impulsively, we risk collapsing the entire Confederation." Graves' eyes narrowed. This was no rogue faction. "We have intelligence from multiple sources, corroborated by our own operatives. The attack was planned and executed by the Androsians' highest military leaders." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "And it's not just about New Terra. This is about a message. A warning. The Androsians want to destroy us, and the entire Confederation is complicit in allowing it." The chamber fell silent. For a moment, no one spoke. The threat had always been there, simmering beneath the surface of the intergalactic alliance. The Androsians, once the most revered species in the Confederation, had long harbored ambitions of dominance. Their technology was unmatched, their culture ancient and mysterious. But now, it seemed, those ambitions were no longer just whispered rumors. They were a cold, terrifying reality. "You speak of revenge, General," another voice cut through the silence, this time from the Zalorian delegate. His long, reptilian tongue flicked nervously in the air. "But war will be costly. We all know that. The Confederation cannot afford another war, especially not one that pits its own members against each other." "We can't afford to sit idly by and wait for them to strike again," Graves countered, her hand clenched into a fist. "The galaxy has seen what they can do. We have to fight. If we do nothing, then we're no better than the traitors who let this happen in the first place." Her words hung in the air, but the Council remained divided. Even among humanity's allies, there was fear of retribution, fear of the Androsian war machine, fear of the Confederation falling apart. Then came the voice of a single delegate who had remained silent until now, Vinar, an Androsian. His face, a blend of elegance and alien severity, remained impassive, but his words were like ice. "I stand with the humans in this. There are factions within our own species who seek to seize control. I've seen their plans. They will not stop unless we take action now." Graves locked eyes with him. Vinar's words were a confirmation of what she had suspected but feared to acknowledge. The betrayal ran deeper than she could have imagined. "This war has already begun," Graves said, her voice low but resolute. "And humanity will not back down." The silence of the council chamber echoed in Amelia Graves' mind long after the session ended. As she made her way to the command center of the human fleet, the weight of the decision she had made pressed down on her. She had hoped for more support from the Confederation, but what had become clear was that humanity would stand alone, at least for now. Graves stepped into the darkened war room, the holographic map of the galaxy flickering to life before her. The human fleet, small but resourceful, was spread thin, guarding colonies and preparing for a war they hadn't anticipated. The Androsian's weapon, a silent planet-crushing device, could be activated at any moment. The Confederation's inaction only made her more resolute. No one would stand in the way of humanity's survival. "General, we've received new intel," Captain Rachel Vasquez, Graves' second-in-command, said as she approached. Her expression was tight, her eyes betraying the concern she refused to voice aloud. "The Androsians have begun moving their fleet. They're preparing to launch a strike on the Epsilon system, one of our most vulnerable colonies." Graves' mind snapped into action. The Epsilon system was crucial, not just for its resources, but for human morale. If they lost it, there would be nothing left to hold on to. The people needed hope. They needed to see that humanity could still fight back. "How much time do we have?" Graves asked. "Less than 12 hours. Their fleet is already en route." Her decision was instantaneous. Prepare the fleet. We're launching a preemptive strike. As Graves and her team worked to organize the counteroffensive, the uncertainty of the situation crept into her thoughts. The Confederation might have abandoned them, but they weren't alone. The Zellorians had expressed tentative support for the human cause, though they were hesitant to commit fully. The Talskai, a reclusive species known for their technological prowess, had been equally vague in their responses, though rumors hinted at a hidden agenda. Yet, when a call came in from an unexpected source, Graves' suspicion grew. "General Graves, this is Commander Laren of the Zellorian fleet." The voice crackled over the comms. "We're ready to assist you in your assault on the Androsian fleet. Consider it our repayment for the lives lost in the attack on New Terra." Graves froze. She had not expected such direct support from the Zellorians. The Zellorian species had been known for their neutrality, rarely involving themselves in conflicts outside their borders, but now they were offering to fight at her side. "We'll be there in a few hours. Hold the line until then, General," Laren continued, his tone resolute. "Understood," Graves replied, hiding her relief behind a tight mask of professionalism. This was the kind of alliance she needed, one forged by necessity rather than diplomacy, and it was exactly the boost they needed to stand a chance against the Androsians. As Graves prepared to leave the war room, a sudden transmission caught her attention. The message was encrypted with a frequency only the highest-ranking human military officers could access. It was from Fane. "General Graves, you were right. The Androsians didn't act alone. The Cable, the shadow group within the Confederation, has been manipulating events behind the scenes. I have proof, important data that could change everything. I need you to meet me on Taros. I'm not safe here." The message ended abruptly. Fane's sudden reappearance was unexpected, and his plea for a secret meeting only deepened the mystery. He had been a trusted officer, but after his unexplained disappearance weeks before, his return felt more like a trap than a lifeline. Yet the urgency of his warning left no room for doubt. Whatever he had uncovered could be the key to exposing the true scale of the conspiracy. Graves' instincts told her this could be a turning point, a way to not only fight the Androsians, but also strike at the heart of the corruption within the Confederation. But she couldn't afford to send a large force. The Zellorians were on their way, and humanity's fleet was already stretched thin. "I'm going to Taros," she said, her voice low but filled with determination. "Prepare a small covert team. We leave immediately." As she walked out of the room, ready to face the unknown, a sense of foreboding gnawed at her. Fane's betrayal still lingered in her thoughts. Was he truly working against them, or had he been caught in the same web of deceit that had ensnared the rest of the galaxy? One thing was certain, humanity was about to take a dangerous step toward uncovering the truth, and there was no turning back. The darkness of space was punctuated by the flash of the Zellorian fleet, their ships emerging from the edge of the Epsilon system like ghostly apparitions. General Amelia Graves stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, her flagship, eyes locked on the tactical display. The Androsian fleet, more than 5 times their size, loomed ahead just outside the system's outermost defense perimeter. "Ready the fleet, Captain," Graves said, her voice unwavering, though the tension in her gut was palpable. "We're not giving them a chance to strike first." Captain Rachel Vasquez nodded, her hands flying over the control panels as the Vanguard and its sister ships prepared for battle. Graves had been in countless skirmishes, but this felt different. It wasn't just the stakes, it was the sheer enormity of the fight. The Zalorians, even with their willingness to join the fight, still didn't understand human tactics, and their fleet was not as coordinated as it needed to be. "Graves, I'm picking up something strange," Vasquez added, her brow furrowing as her eyes flickered over the scanners. "There's a faint signal coming from the Androsian flagship, but it's not standard communication. It's almost like a countdown." A chill ran down Graves' spine. "What do you mean? A countdown to what?" "I don't know yet, but it's too synchronized with their fleet's movements. It's as if they're preparing for something catastrophic." Before Graves could respond, the comms crackled with a deep, resonant voice, one she had hoped never to hear in a battlefield. "General Graves," came the voice of Commander Vainmer, the Androsian admiral who had once been a trusted ally, now the face of humanity's greatest threat. "You have made a grave mistake. Turn your fleet around, or we will end this before it begins." Graves gritted her teeth. "I won't let you destroy any more of my people, Vonner. This war is far from over, and you'll be the first to pay for the lives you've stolen." Vonner's laugh echoed through the channel, chilling and hollow. "You misunderstand, General. This is not just war, it's the end of your species. Watch closely, and you will witness your own extinction." Without another word, the Androsian flagship fired its first volley, a pulse of concentrated energy that tore through the edge of the human formation. A human cruiser, the Indomitable, was obliterated instantly, its hull cracked like an eggshell. Explosions burst across the void, lighting up the darkness with the fiery glow of destruction. "Enemy fire! Return fire now!" Graves shouted, her voice commanding as her fleet retaliated. The Vanguard unleashed its plasma cannons, and human warships flanked the Androsian ships with precise, coordinated strikes. It was an all-out assault, but there was no turning back now. The Zalorian ships joined the fray, though their unfamiliarity with human tactics left them vulnerable. One of their ships, the Nereth, was caught off guard by an Androsian cruiser, its shields buckling under the heavy fire. Explosions rocked the Zalorian vessel, sending it spiraling into the heart of the Androsian fleet. "Captain, they're targeting the Nereth," Vasquez shouted, panic creeping into her voice. "We can't lose them." "Full speed ahead, divert power to forward shields," Graves ordered. The battle raged on, and as the seconds ticked by, the human fleet's superior tactics began to show. Though outnumbered, their ability to predict the Androsians' next move and strike with devastating precision began to turn the tide. Graves's forces fought with a raw, unrelenting fury, their ships darting through the chaos, exploiting every weakness in the Androsian lines. But the real horror came when the countdown reached its final seconds. The Androsian's flagship released a pulse so massive it caused a ripple through space. The explosion wasn't a blast of energy, it was a gravitational wave, distorting time and space itself, ripping through the fabric of reality. "Brace for impact," Graves shouted, but it was too late. The wave slammed into the human fleet, warping the trajectory of every ship caught in its wake. The Vanguard lurched violently, its systems faltering under the force. Graves was thrown from her seat, the world spinning as alarms blared around her. When the chaos subsided, the damage was clear. Several human ships had been thrown off course, their communications jammed, and the Vanguard was heavily damaged, with critical systems offline. But amidst the chaos, something unexpected happened. The Androsians, too, were shaken by the gravitational pulse. Their fleet had taken significant damage as well. The Nereth, though severely crippled, had survived the initial assault, and its Silurian crew was fighting to stabilize it. Graves picked herself up from the deck, blood dripping from a cut on her forehead. Through gritted teeth, she activated the comms. "Report. We're alive, General. But the Vanguard is offline." Vasquez's voice came through, shaky but determined. "We've taken heavy casualties, but the Androsians, they've lost their edge too." A spark of hope ignited within Graves. The Androsians had underestimated humanity's resilience. The tide had not completely turned, but they were far from defeated. She looked out at the stars, watching the crippled remains of the Androsian fleet shift ever so slightly, their arrogance now replaced by hesitation. "This isn't over, not by a long shot," Graves muttered, her resolve hardening. "We've bled for every inch, and we'll keep fighting until we win." As her fleet regrouped, ready for the next round of the battle, General Graves knew that this first bled was only the beginning. The war for survival had begun in earnest, and humanity's spirit was something the Androsians could not easily crush. The aftermath of the battle was a scene of devastation and defiance. The Vanguard, though damaged, remained intact, floating in the void like a bruised but unyielding giant. Graves stood on the bridge, her mind calculating the next move, but the ringing silence around her spoke louder than any strategy. The explosion of the gravitational wave had torn through her fleet, disabling several ships and killing hundreds. The loss of the Indomitable still hung heavily on her mind. Its destruction was a grim reminder of the stakes they faced. "General Graves, we've managed to stabilize most of the fleet, but the Vanguard is in critical condition," Vasquez reported, her voice tight with exhaustion. "It'll take days to repair the damage, maybe more. Our engines are down, and the core is unstable." Graves nodded grimly, rubbing the blood from her forehead. Her fingers came away stained, but her mind was clear. They had to strike again. This could not be their only engagement with the Androsians. She had no choice but to push forward, but the human fleet was at its breaking point. "What's the status on the Nereth?" Graves asked, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions churning within her. "Silurian ships are still in combat, but the Nereth is heavily damaged. Their crew is trying to stabilize. They're requesting backup, General," Vasquez said. "The Silurians are offering to send us reinforcements, but they're hesitant to commit more until we can guarantee their safety." Gray's eyes narrowed. The Silurians had proven their resolve, but she understood their caution. The battle they just fought had left everyone rattled. It was not just the tactical risks, but the raw brutality of it all. She couldn't afford to lose their support now, not when the Androsians were still threatening the entire galaxy. "We can't afford to wait," Graves replied. "Tell them we'll assist. Send a small fleet to back them up. We'll patch ourselves up and get back into the fight as soon as possible." As Vasquez relayed the orders, Graves turned to the starboard viewport, watching the stars drift by. The weight of the situation pressed down on her chest. It wasn't just the battle. It was the realization that this war was only beginning, and the galaxy was already changing. Humanity's place in the Confederation had always been tenuous, built on alliances with species that had their own agendas, their own desires. But the Androsians had shaken the foundations of everything, revealing cracks that had been hidden beneath the surface. It was only a matter of time before more species would choose sides, or worse, stand aside entirely. And if humanity wasn't prepared, they could find themselves fighting alone in a war of survival. Meanwhile, in the darkened corridors of the Nereth, Commander Laren's voice crackled through the comms as the ship's systems struggled to stay online. "General Graves, we've sustained heavy damage, but we're still operational. There'll be some time before we can make repairs, but the crew is holding strong." Graves' resolve hardened. The Silurians had held their ground, but the Androsians had also learned something vital. Their first strike had not shattered humanity's spirit. and that made them a much bigger target. "We're sending reinforcements your way, Commander," Graves said, her voice firm. "Hold your position. We're not leaving anyone behind." "I'll do what I can, General," Laren replied. "But you should know, there's something more to the Androsian fleet than we've seen so far. They've activated additional cloaking devices, and their ships are harder to track than we initially thought. This won't be easy." Graves didn't flinch. She knew the Androsians would adapt. They always had, but the question remained, could humanity adapt fast enough? The thought gnawed at her as she entered the briefing room, where her senior officers had gathered. "Listen up," Graves said, standing before the table, her gaze sweeping across each officer in turn. "The Androsians are using advanced cloaking technology. We need to counter this. Vasquez, I want your team working on a way to track their ships through interference. The Xylorians have experience with stealth tech. See if they can help us get a better read on their fleet." Vasquez nodded sharply. "We're already on it, General, but it won't be easy. The Androsians' tech is far more advanced than anything we've worked with before." "Understood, but I'm not leaving them an opening," Graves said. She glanced toward the display on the wall, showing the still lingering remains of the Androsian fleet, now scattered and disoriented. They had taken a blow, but they were still dangerous. It was a reminder that the real battle had only just begun. Graves turned back to face the officers. "We've suffered losses, but we're not done. We fight, we adapt, and we strike when the time is right." As her officers nodded in agreement, a voice from the back of the room cut through the air. "General Graves, there's something else." Lieutenant Commander Fane's voice echoed from the comm system, his face appearing on the screen. "I've uncovered a new development. The Androsians, they're preparing something bigger, something that could change the course of the war." Graves felt her heart stop. Fane's voice was grim, and in the silence of the room, every officer knew one thing: whatever was coming, it would be far worse than they had imagined. General Graves leaned over the holographic table, her eyes fixed on the new data coming through. The Nerith had successfully held its ground, but the Androsian threat was far from over. Lieutenant Commander Fane's warning about something bigger weighed heavily on her. Humanity and their allies had managed to survive the first clash, but the shadow of what was to come loomed large. The war room was quiet, the tension thick. Graves could feel the growing unease among her officers. They had won a battle, yes, but the cost was high, and it was becoming clear that the Androsians were far more prepared for this war than anyone had anticipated. "Fane, what exactly are we dealing with?" Graves asked, her voice sharp. The lieutenant commander's face appeared on the screen, his expression grim. "The Androsians have begun constructing a new weapon," Fane said, his voice low. "It's unlike anything we've seen. It's not a weapon of mass destruction per se. It's a weapon that targets the fabric of space itself, a destabilizer. If they complete it, they could tear apart entire star systems, collapsing the very gravity wells that hold them together. Entire civilizations would be wiped out before they even knew what hit them." Graves' breath caught in her throat. A weapon capable of destabilizing stars? It sounded impossible, but then, so had the Androsian fleet's cloaking technology, and yet it was very real. "How long until they finish it?" she asked, already bracing for the answer. "At this rate, they could have it operational in less than 3 weeks, Fane replied. "We don't have much time." Graves felt a surge of anger at the thought of an enemy so brazen and ruthless. The Androsians had crossed a line, and now they had to pay. But the weight of the reality was pressing down on her shoulders. She didn't have a fleet large enough to take on such a weapon directly. But she had no intention of sitting idly by while the Androsians brought about the death of millions. "Vasquez, what's our current position?" Graves asked, turning to her second in command. "We're still in no condition to launch a large-scale offensive, General," Vasquez answered, her voice strained. "The fleet is patched together, but the Vanguard can't sustain any heavy combat just yet. We'll need at least another 5 days to make meaningful repairs. The Xylorians are still stabilizing the Nereth and can only provide limited support. Graves gritted her teeth, running her hand through her short-cropped hair. We don't have 5 days. We need to act now. If we wait, we'll lose more than we can afford. Fane, I need you to get us more intel. Find out where this weapon is being constructed and any weaknesses we can exploit. Fane nodded, his expression resolute. Understood, General. I'll gather everything I can, but we'll need to move fast. As he cut the transmission, Graves turned back to the display. The Androsian fleet was scattered, but she knew it wouldn't be long before they regrouped, and when they did, they would have the weapon ready. The thought of waiting for the Vanguard to be fully repaired gnawed at her. We can't afford to sit back, Graves muttered to herself. We need to hit them where it hurts. Turning to her officers, she met their gazes, knowing that whatever she decided, they would follow. Prepare a strike force. We'll infiltrate one of their supply convoys. If we can't stop the weapon itself, we'll at least delay its construction by taking out their supplies. We'll use the Xylorians' stealth tech to get in and out before they even know we're there. Vasquez raised an eyebrow. You're sending a small force to strike directly at Androsian convoys? Graves nodded. We don't have time for a full assault, and every minute we delay is a minute they can't use to complete that weapon. It's risky, but it's our best shot. We'll need every ship we have to cover the convoy, but I want no more than 6 ships on this mission. Fast, quiet, and precise. Vasquez's expression hardened, and she gave a sharp nod. Understood, General. I'll start preparing the crew for deployment. Graves didn't look at the officers around her. Instead, her gaze was fixed on the map, tracing the path of the Androsian convoy. It was bold, dangerous, and fraught with uncertainty. But the only way forward was to strike first. They had no room for hesitation. As the plan took shape, she was reminded of what had driven humanity to this point, the refusal to back down. The Androsians had underestimated them, but they wouldn't make that mistake again. Captain, Graves said, turning to Vasquez once more, I need you to lead this operation. Get in, get the job done, and get out. We can't afford any more casualties. Vasquez looked her square in the eye, and for a moment, the weight of the mission settled in her gaze. We won't let you down, General. As Graves watched her leave to prepare, she couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that this mission would set the tone for everything that followed. Humanity had survived the first wave of Androsian aggression, but they were about to face something far darker. The galaxy would never be the same. The Vanguard limped through the silent void of space, its hull scarred from the previous battle. The repairs were underway, but the ship was far from ready to face the full wrath of the Androsian fleet. Meanwhile, General Graves watched as her officers prepared for the covert strike against the Androsian convoy. Every moment spent in this fragile lull felt like an eternity. The clock was ticking, and their plan had to succeed. Failure wasn't an option, not when the weapon that could obliterate entire star systems was looming on the horizon. Are we ready? Graves asked, standing at the entrance to the briefing room, her eyes scanning the assembled officers and their teams. Vasquez nodded, her face set in determination. We've got 6 ships, General, including 2 Xylorian stealth vessels. We'll stay out of sight as long as possible, moving through the asteroid field near Sector Gamma. It's the perfect place to ambush the convoy. Graves' eyes narrowed. And the convoy's defenses? Minimal, General, Vasquez replied. They're expecting a smooth supply run. Their primary concern is getting through that asteroid field safely, which is why we're using it to our advantage. Graves' mind worked through the variables, analyzing every possible risk. The mission was dangerous, but it was their only chance to delay the Androsians' weapon. If they could cripple the supply lines, it might buy humanity enough time to strike back. Remember, we can't afford to engage in a full-scale battle, Grace continued. We need to be ghosts, swift, precise, and gone before they even realize we're there. The longer we stay in their space, the greater the chance of them calling reinforcements. The team nodded. The stakes were clear, and everyone knew what was on the line. Graves turned to Vasquez, the woman she trusted above all others. "Captain, you lead this mission. The success of this operation falls on you," Graves said, her voice unwavering. Vasquez gave a quick salute, her face resolute. "Understood, General. We'll get it done." As the team left the briefing room, Graves felt a strange sense of unease settle in her chest. The weight of command was ever present, but this felt different. Sending her most trusted officers on a covert mission like this was risky, especially when they were operating with limited resources. Every part of her wanted to join them, to be there in the field, but she knew that her place was here, coordinating the broader strategy. "General," came a voice behind her. It was Fane, his face grave. "There's more. I've been digging into the Androsian fleet's movements. They've started construction on another destabilizer, something even bigger than the first one. This one could tear apart entire sectors. If we don't act soon, we might not have a galaxy left to save." Graves felt her stomach tighten. "Damn it, how long?" "Another 2 weeks, maybe less," Fane said. "I don't think we have that kind of time. We need to hit them hard, or we'll lose everything." Graves clenched her fists at her sides. The pressure was mounting, but she refused to break. She couldn't. For humanity, for the people she had sworn to protect, she would do whatever it took to stop the Androsians. "We'll take them down, Fane," she said, her voice cold with resolve. "Whatever it takes." The 6-ship strike force slipped silently into the asteroid field, the shadows of the rocks looming like sentinels around them. Vasquez stood at the helm of the Apollo, one of the Zalorian stealth vessels, her eyes scanning the empty expanse. The rest of the team was spread out, positioned for the ambush. The plan was simple: take out the convoy's lead vessel first, disable the rest, and make their exit before the Androsians realized what had happened. Approaching the convoy, Vasquez said quietly into the comm, "All ships, hold position. Let them get closer." The convoy, a handful of heavily armored transport ships, moved cautiously through the field, unaware of the trap closing in around them. Vasquez's heart raced, but her hands were steady on the controls. This was the moment. The Apollo and the other stealth vessels activated their cloaking systems, vanishing into the darkness. Vasquez's breath caught as she saw the convoy's lead ship, an Androsian transport, heavily guarded, slip into view. It was almost too easy. "Now," Vasquez whispered, pressing the command to fire. The Apollo's cannons unleashed a precise barrage of plasma bolts, targeting the weak points of the lead vessel's shields. The ship erupted in a ball of fire, the transport's defenses unable to withstand the concentrated fire. The convoy's escorts, 2 Androsian warships, dropped out of formation, their sensors finally registering the attack. "Target the escorts," Vasquez commanded. "Take them out before they can call for reinforcements." In perfect synchronization, the other ships of the strike force engaged. Missiles streaked through space, hitting the Androsian warships with pinpoint accuracy. The convoy's escorts didn't stand a chance. Explosions rocked the void, sending debris scattering in all directions. "Enemy reinforcements incoming," came the voice of Lieutenant Theron from the comm. "We've got less than 2 minutes before they arrive." Vasquez's heart raced. "We've done our job. Let's get out of here. All ships, fall back." The remaining transports, now floating aimlessly without escorts, were left to drift in the asteroid field, their supplies vulnerable. The strike force began its retreat, maneuvering through the dense rock formations, taking advantage of the terrain to avoid the Androsian reinforcements. As the strike team reassembled and made their way out of the field, the stars beyond stretched out, peaceful and uncaring. But for Vasquez, the mission felt like a success, yet the reality of their situation remained. They had bought humanity time, but how much was still uncertain. The Androsians would be back. And next time, they would be ready. The Apollo and its strike force limped back to the safety of the human fleet, their mission a success but not without cost. The convoy had been crippled, its supplies scattered across the asteroid field, but Vasquez knew the Androsians wouldn't take this defeat lightly. Their reinforcements would be swift, and the retaliation would be brutal. She could already feel the weight of the consequences settling on her shoulders. As the Apollo docked with the Vanguard, Vasquez stepped off the ship, the familiar hum of the command deck greeting her. Graves was waiting for her, her sharp eyes scanning her expression. "Report, Captain," Graves commanded, her voice steady but tinged with concern. "We hit the convoy hard, General," Vasquez replied, the exhaustion clear in her voice. "We took out their lead transport, disabled the escorts, and scattered the rest. The supplies are in disarray, and the Androsians will have to scramble to recover. But they're going to retaliate." Graves nodded, her gaze unflinching. "We knew they would. We just bought ourselves a little more time, that's all." Vasquez hesitated, then spoke again. "There's something else, General. As we were pulling back, I saw something on their sensors, a massive Androsian warship, far beyond anything we've seen before. It was cloaked, but I'm sure it was there. We barely escaped before it caught our position." A chill ran down Graves' spine. The Androsians had already demonstrated their technological superiority, but this new ship, a hidden weapon lurking in the dark, was a new level of threat. It was clear now that the war was no longer just about weapons or tactics. The Androsians were playing a game of attrition, pushing humanity to its breaking point. "Have you gotten any intel on that ship?" Graves asked. "Not yet," Vasquez said, shaking her head. "But I can tell you one thing, they're getting ready for something big. That ship wasn't a scout. It was a command ship, probably directing their entire fleet. If they bring it into the fight, we'll be at a serious disadvantage." Graves stood in silence, the weight of her decision pressing down. Humanity had been on the defensive for so long. Every move they made felt like a desperate attempt to stave off annihilation. The Androsians had pushed them to the brink, and now it seemed they were ready to crush them entirely. But Graves refused to let them win. "We need to find that ship and destroy it," Graves said, her voice low and determined. "If we can take out their command ship, it'll destabilize their entire fleet. We'll cut the head off the snake before it can strike again." Vasquez gave a tight nod. "Agreed, but we'll need more than just a strike force this time. If that ship's what I think it is, it won't go down easily." Graves glanced at the tactical display, her mind already calculating the next move. The Vanguard was still in rough shape, and the rest of the fleet wasn't fully repaired. They were working against the clock. The Androsians would strike first, and when they did, humanity needed to be ready to fight back. "We'll rally the fleet," Graves said, her voice resolute. "We'll hit them with everything we've got." In the quiet corridors of the Vanguard, Fane paced, his mind racing. He had been gathering intel on the Androsian fleet, but every piece of information seemed to lead to more questions. The command ship Vasquez had reported, a vessel cloaked and hidden in plain sight, was the missing link in the puzzle. But what was it really? Why hadn't the Androsians used it before now? The answer, he suspected, was chilling. The Androsians had been waiting for the right moment to unleash their true power. And if that ship was truly their flagship, humanity was facing something far worse than they had imagined. "Fane," came a voice from behind him. He turned to see Graves standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "General," Fane said, his voice tight. "I've been analyzing their movements. I think I've figured it out. That ship, they've been hiding it. It's not just a command vessel. It's armed with a weapon we haven't seen before, one capable of bypassing any of our shields." Graves took a deep breath. "How much time do we have before they launch it?" "Not much," Fane replied, his voice low. "From the readings I've gathered, they're preparing to use it in the next few hours. We need to move fast. Graves' jaw clenched. They had no more time for hesitation. The Androsians were about to unleash their most deadly weapon, and humanity's window to strike back was closing fast. "We're going after it," Graves said, her voice filled with cold determination. "Prepare the fleet. We'll make our move before they can launch." The Vanguard and the rest of the fleet assembled in the black void of space, its lights flickering weakly as the final repairs were hastily completed. The strike force from the earlier mission was still reeling from their close call, but they knew what was at stake. The final confrontation was imminent. The Androsians were ready, and so was humanity. Graves stood at the center of the command room, her hands clasped behind her back. The crew was tense, but they were ready. Vasquez, Fane, and the rest of the officers had gathered around the table. There would be no turning back. "It's now or never," Graves said, her voice calm but heavy with the knowledge of the risk. "We're going to take down their command ship. If we don't, the war could be over before it even really begins." The room was silent for a moment, and then Vasquez spoke, her voice steady. "We won't let you down, General." Graves nodded, her mind made up. There was no other choice. This was the moment. Humanity's fate would be decided in the next few hours, and they would fight until the very end. The fleet moved into position, cloaked in the dark expanse of space, just beyond the outer rim of the Androsian stronghold. The vastness of the void stretched endlessly before them, but the tension on board the Vanguard was palpable. Graves stood at the helm, her eyes locked on the tactical display as it showed the Androsian command ship, a massive, ominous vessel, floating ominously in the center of a heavily fortified fleet. It was their last chance. One misstep, one mistake, and humanity would be doomed. "We're in position," Vasquez reported over the comms, her voice calm despite the high stakes. "We can't get any closer without detection. The Androsian fleet is too well guarded." Graves nodded, her thoughts racing. "We don't need to get closer. We just need to hit them hard enough to break their formation. Once we disable their flagship, the rest of their fleet will scatter." Fane appeared on the screen, his expression grim. "General, I've been running simulations. If that flagship has the weapon we suspect, it could incapacitate our ships in a single strike. We need to be careful about how we approach this." Graves didn't flinch. "We don't have the luxury of caution. This is it. We fight to win, or we lose everything." The crew was ready. Everyone aboard the Vanguard had been through hell and back, and this final mission would either be their salvation or their end. There was no middle ground. "Captain Vasquez, take the lead," Graves ordered. "We'll follow in behind and provide support. Fane, you're on comms. I want to know everything they're doing in real time." General," Vasquez said, giving the order to begin the final approach. As the fleet silently moved toward the Androsian flagship, the feeling of finality settled over the crew. There would be no more chances. This was the point of no return. If they failed, the galaxy would fall under the crushing boot of the Androsian Empire. "Stealth mode engaged," Vasquez said, as her ship, along with the other stealth vessels, slowly faded into the darkness, moving undetected toward the enemy fleet. Their cloaking technology was their only advantage, allowing them to move close without being immediately detected. The goal was simple: infiltrate, disable the flagship, and escape before the Androsians could respond. As the stealth ships drew nearer, the Androsians began to stir, their sensors detecting the faintest of anomalies. The massive flagship, still cloaked, loomed like a shadow in the distance. It was enormous, almost a quarter of the size of the Vanguard itself, and it moved with the grace of a predator waiting to pounce. Then, without warning, the silence was shattered by the roar of plasma fire. Vasquez's ship was the first to strike, unleashing a barrage of torpedoes that slammed into the flagship's shields. The explosion was deafening, but it barely caused a ripple on the Androsian vessel's defenses. It wasn't enough. "Shields are holding," Vasquez reported, her voice steady but laced with frustration. "It's going to take more than that." "Everyone, focus fire on their weak points," Graves commanded. "Hit them with everything we've got. We can't afford to let up." The battle erupted in full force as the fleet moved in, unleashing volleys of plasma bolts and torpedoes at the flagship. Each strike lit up the dark void like a star-going supernova, but the Androsian shields held strong. The flagship's massive cannons, now powered up, began to return fire with terrifying precision. Energy blasts crackled through the darkness, narrowly missing the fleet as they danced on the edge of death. Fane's voice broke through the chaos. "General, they're charging the main weapon. It's going to fire soon." Graves' heart sank. The weapon, the one they feared could destroy entire fleets in a single strike, was ready. She knew what it meant. The fleet was vulnerable. This was their last opportunity to take it down. "Vasquez now," Graves yelled. The Apollo surged forward, launching a final desperate barrage at the command ship. The ship's outer hull began to crack under the intense fire, its shields flickering as the impact of the torpedoes slowly began to tear at its defenses. Vasquez pressed the advantage, using every last ounce of speed to stay ahead of the Androsians' retaliatory fire. Then, a blinding flash of light illuminated the battlefield. The main weapon of the Androsian flagship fired, a massive pulse of energy that split the space around it like a ruptured star. The beam slammed into the nearest ship, sending it spiraling into oblivion, its hull disintegrating in an instant. The fleet recoiled from the shockwave, and for a moment, everything seemed to slow. But Graves didn't hesitate. "Focus all fire on the core, now." With the flagship's shields weakening from the relentless assault, the fleet's weapons found their mark. A final concentrated barrage hit the heart of the Androsian command ship. There was a deafening explosion, and the flagship's massive structure cracked open, fire and debris erupting from its core. The weapon sputtered and died, its potential for destruction snuffed out in an instant. The Androsian fleet, now leaderless and without their most advanced weapon, began to break apart. Ships scattered, retreating into the dark corners of space, unable to fight back against the human forces that had dealt them a crushing blow. Graves let out a long breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The battle was over. The Androsians had been defeated. For now, at least. "General," Fane said, his voice tinged with awe, "we did it. The flagship is gone. The fleet's broken. Humanity, we've won." But Graves knew better than to celebrate just yet. The war wasn't over. The Androsians would regroup, and the galaxy was still a dangerous place. But for the first time in a long while, she felt hope. A hope that humanity could fight back, that they could survive and thrive. The broken oath had been fulfilled, and humanity had emerged victorious. For now.